Welcome back to MVM. Today we are going to take a look at Herobane from Scalebird Games. Herobane is a competitive dungeon building game where you are working to build the best and most dangerous dungeon in order to lure heroes to their doom and score victory points. This is a race game where you are racing around the table to construct that dungeon in order to generate resources, bring minions out into play, and ultimately lure heroes into your dungeon in order to defeat them and score points. Now, the number of points that you need to win this game is going to be variable based on the length of the game, the skill of the players, and you can even decide to set a number of heroes or play an epic game and just determine who has the most points at the end of that. So there's a lot of variability when it comes to the different game modes, but at its core, it is this competitive game experience where up to 4 players are going to take a dungeon tile and try to build out the best dungeon possible. You're going to see one of those dungeon sheets here in front of me. This is the Doom Knight. Now, this is an example of what each one of these sheets is going to look like, with each one putting you at the helm of some kind of evil fantasy villain. And you're going to have spaces here on this grid to build out your dungeon. You'll notice that each one of these squares has a number of resources that you can generate. You'll be able to place tiles over these in order to generate more resources over the course of the game. Now, I do want to take this opportunity to mention that everything you see in front of you is completely a prototype. This is not final components by any stretch. In fact, I'm still using little cutouts for everything, but you'll be able to see what the final components will look like. They will have examples up online and everything. But for the cards, the artwork, none of it is exactly final yet. But each player is going to take one of these sheets and place it in front of them, along with 3 dungeon cards. Now, these cards are going to be how you improve your dungeon. Some of them are going to allow you to place rooms in your dungeon by taking those room tiles and laying them over your grid. Some of them are going to bring minions out into your dungeon in order to fight heroes. And some of them are going to be one-time use gambit cards that are going to have some kind of effect. So each player is going to place their sheet in front of them, collect some chips, and then start the game. It's important to note that each one of these sheets is a little asymmetric. The layout of things is a little different, their abilities are a little different, and the resources that you start with are different. You have red chips, black chips, and reputation chips. And those reputation chips are what can be turned into victory points. And each player is going to lay those sheets out in front of them, and out in the middle of the playing field, you're going to have a row of 5 hero cards. This is almost like a draft in that you're going to be able to choose one of these heroes to lure into your dungeon. But you need to be able to defeat that hero if you bring them in. If you can't defeat them, the hero is going to come in and actually loot your dungeon instead and hinder your progress. But the first thing you're going to do on every single one of your turns is roll the 2 resource dice. And you see that there's 1 black and 1 red die. And this corresponds to the rows and columns of your dungeon sheet. So you're going to roll both of those dice, you're going to see where they meet, and you're going to collect the resources printed there, taking them from your supply and bringing them down to your collected chips space. These are the chips that you'll be able to spend to play cards in your hand, build out your dungeon, and maybe trigger some of the abilities that have costs. In addition, some of these heroes are going to turn your green reputation chips into victory points, which is necessary to win the game. Now, what's interesting here is that whenever you roll these resource dice, you gain these resources, as does the next player in line. So you're actually getting resources twice over the course of a round. And you can also mitigate this. If you didn't earn quite enough resources, you can start discarding cards from your hand to generate resources instead. So you're never quite limited. But the goal, of course, is to start building out your engine by playing these room tiles to the side, taking the correct pieces and building them out in kind of a puzzly fashion. Some of these rooms will also have tap abilities that will sit out in front of you that you can exhaust once per turn in order to do something either within your dungeon or against one of the heroes that come into play. Now, in order to be prepared to beat those heroes, you're going to need to find ways to draw cards to get more of those minions and place those minions in front of you. It is these minions that will be fighting the heroes, because once you're sure that you have a chance of defeating one, you can look out here and you can choose one of these heroes to take in front of you, and they will enter your dungeon. Now, there's a few things you need to consider here when fighting a hero. For one, they have an attack and they have a defense, and that's going to matter when they're fighting your minions. They also have abilities that trigger when they come into your dungeon that can catch you a little unprepared, and they have some victory things that you'll get whenever you defeat that particular hero. So you have to decide from what's available which you want to take. You can also take heroes that you know you can't beat just to keep other players from having them, because this is not necessarily a friendly game. You're going to be going head to head with other players trying to block them as much as possible. Now, once you have a hero in your dungeon, you have to defeat that hero. There's a few ways you can do this. You can use the abilities on some of your room cards that might deal damage. You can play some of those gambit cards from your hand that might deal damage. You might have powers that deal damage. There's a variety of ways you can deal damage, but combat is probably the most common. Combat is going to be one minion versus one hero. You're going to roll your dice for your attack, you're going to roll your dice for your defense, and you're going to see how those values add up with the minion and the hero doing damage back and forth to each other. Of course, there are a variety of ways that you can mitigate this through the playing of cards and effects that are already sitting out in front of you. But what's really interesting about this battle system is that you don't have to finish your combat in one go. For example, you can start off by fighting your hero, and if your minion doesn't kill him in one hit, you can actually pause, you can come and play cards from your hand, you can do other things, and then you can go back to that second round of combat. So maybe you can find some ways to boost your minions in between those combat rounds. Now, the only thing you can't do is start a new combat with a different minion. So if the first minion gets injured, you can't bench them, so to speak, and bring out a new minion to fight the hero. You have to continue fighting with that same minion until either the minion is defeated, in which case it's discarded, or you manage to defeat the hero, in which case you're going to take that hero and get those rewards. Now, there are two types of heroes you're going to fight over the game. Regular heroes, who are going to give you some rewards like reputation, and then elite heroes who are going to turn that reputation into victory points. And those are the victory points that you're going to need to win the game. Of course, those elite heroes are going to be much more difficult to face off against. Now, these heroes are going to stay in your dungeon if you can't defeat them. At the end of the round, after you've triggered any kind of end of round abilities from cards that are sitting in front of you, this hero is going to reach the end of your dungeon and plunder it. You're going to roll those resource dice again, just like at the beginning of your turn. However, this time, you're going to lose whatever room you end up with. So that hero is going to steal that resource, and they're going to be removed from the game. Even if you didn't choose a hero, you're always going to replace one, and you're going to draw a new one to come out so that you can keep this pool kind of fresh for the next player. Once you're done, the next player is going to take their turn. They're going to activate any start of turn abilities they have. They're going to roll the resource dice for both themselves and the next player in line. And they're going to try to continue building out their engine, drafting new heroes to fight, and so on and so forth around the table until one player hits that goal number. Now, there is a lot of take that element to this game, even though there isn't a lot of direct player interaction. As in, you're not actually going to be sending your minions to other players' dungeon or fighting other players directly. You can still interfere with other players by blocking them, playing cards from your hand, and kind of hate drafting out some of these heroes that are in front of them. So there's going to be definitely a lot of tension at the table, and you're going to be working on building the most efficient dungeon the fastest. So thank you so much for taking a look at Herobane with me today. The game is on Kickstarter, so take a look at the Kickstarter page to see what all the final components are going to look like. You'll see the chips, the tiles, the artwork for the cards, and everything. And of course, this game is ripe for expansions in the form of new cards, new dungeon boards, and things like that. So make sure to stay tuned to the campaign, because I'm sure they're going to have things to announce over time. And as always, thank you for watching, liking, subscribing, and following us here at MVM, and I will see you next time.
Now, before you go, there's one more thing I want to talk about. I hate to bring this up, but YouTube analytics tells us to do this. So please click on the subscription button, ring the bell, watch our next video, rinse and repeat. Just keep doing that over and over and over and over.